up here, you each get a microphone. Cheryl, you'll find it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, use it in the middle.
So,
Hello, everyone.
No, you don't want to.
Steve? This mic isn't working.
hello? Is it working?
Yes. We'll just use this one.
Okay.
Oh, it's not going to work very well.
Good afternoon, there it goes. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Laypersons Hour. This is our opportunity to transition from the morning to the afternoon with a chance to learn from each other from our congregation. This year, we're delighted to have some recognizable faces as our speakers, and to introduce them is Cheryl Kimmler.
Hi, thank you, Rabbi. Shana Tova. It is my great pleasure to introduce my good friends, Helene and Seth Diamond, our speakers for this afternoon. As you know, Seth is our president and our fearless leader, and Helene is a teacher in our Hebrew school. They have been members at RTFH for almost 25 years. We are fortunate that they will be sharing their story, focusing on the survival of Helene's parents, David and Clara Levy, during the Holocaust. What makes this particular story unique is how Helene, Seth, and their children, Max and Zachary, reconnected to the family in Italy that saved Helene's father. Please welcome Helene and Seth Diamond.
Thank you, Cheryl. Tell me if you can hear me or can. When my kids were growing up, I didn't push Holocaust education on them, as it was a traumatic part of my parents' history as well as my own. But in getting older, I realized that the window of opportunity to preserve my parents' story was getting smaller. So in November 2024, I completed a book about my parents, primarily to pass down to my kids. I had no idea what a journey this would take me on. Seth is going to pass around just a couple of copies if you're interested in taking a look. There are a lot more detail in the book, obviously, than what I'm going to go into here. As an overview, I will tell you a bit about my mother's story, followed by my father's story, and finally, we'll tell you about the past summer when Seth and I and our sons traveled to Italy to meet the family who hid my father during the war. My mother, Clara Levy, born Clara Kupperstein, was born in Bilgeraj, Poland in 1919. She was the youngest of 7 children. Bilgeraj was a small town, essentially a shtetl. At one point, my mother and her parents, her brother Wolf and his wife Suri, relocated to Warsaw in the hopes of finding work. This is a picture of my mother on the left, her sister Hinda on the right, who I was named after, and their mother in the middle. Okay. Can you go to the next picture? This is a picture of my mother's brother, Wolf, and his wife, Suri. Those 2 pictures survived the entire war, so I will tell you the story of her escape. But when she escaped Poland in 1939, she took these 2 photos with her, and these 2 photos survived the entire war while she was in slave labor camps in Russia. So that's just miraculous. And I didn't realize that until I started working on the book and came across these photos. And my mother had already passed away, and I wished she was there so I could ask her, how did she possibly take 2 photos that survived the entire war? After Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939, Clara, my mother, and her family endured a month of bombing. Soon after Poland surrendered and the Nazis marched into Warsaw, Clara's brothers and father were taken every day for forced labor. In October 1940, the Warsaw Ghetto was created, and Clara and her family were forced to move inside. The conditions were horrible. Clara's parents purchased fake ID papers for her, and she used them to sneak out of the ghetto at night to obtain food for her family. She spoke excellent Polish and therefore was not caught. And that was definitely something I remember my mother saying. I think she was very proud of the fact that she spoke excellent Polish, which I guess not all the Jews did. Her parents discussed escaping, but they were physically ailing, and Wolf had a young baby. As conditions worsened, Clara made the decision to escape with a group of young Jews, and she was only 20 years old at the time. They lived in the forests and traveled at night trying to reach the Russian border. Once they got to Russia, they were arrested and put into slave labor camps. Clara was transferred many times until she was deep into Siberia, where she worked in extreme cold, cutting trees and building rafts. Ultimately, she contracted typhus, but managed to stay alive until the end of the war. After the war, Clara returned to Poland and learned that only she and one brother survived. Everyone else, including her parents, had been murdered. She retained her false identity papers and took a job. Clara ultimately escaped to a displaced persons camp in Naples, Italy. She was part of the mass migration of hundreds of thousands of Jews from Eastern Europe due to continued anti-Semitism after the war. Clara met my father, David Levy, at this displaced persons camp and ultimately married there. These are my parents' wedding pictures. And that's their wedding in the displaced persons camp. You see them in the middle. Finally, in 1950, 5 years after the war ended, David and Clara were able to come to the U.S. And the next picture is my parents on the SS General Hershey. That's in 1950. Okay. I'm going to move on to my father's story. My father, David Levy, was one of 10 children born to Rachel and Moses Levy on February 12, 1909, in Banja Luka in the former Yugoslavia. The family was a traditional Sephardic family that prayed in Ladino. Growing up, my father taught us a couple of Ladino prayers as well, specifically the one, instead of Birkat Hamazon, which we say after eating, he had a Ladino prayer that we used to say. In this picture, you can see David's entire family and David kneeling on the bottom left. David was taken out of school at a young age and became an apprentice in plumbing and metalwork. He ultimately became a successful contractor, specializing in building domed copper roofs used in churches, schools, and hospitals. That's my father at one of his projects in Yugoslavia before the war. In contrast to my mother, who hated Poland and never wanted to step foot back in that country, my father spoke often and affectionately about Bosnia and Banja Luka in particular. Depicted here is my father walking in the snow in the Petar Kocic Park that he was fond of. When the war broke out, David escaped from the Yugoslav army. He learned that Jews were required to wear the yellow star and that his business was confiscated by the Ustaše, the Croatian fascists who were in league with the Nazis. When they required Jews to register, David made the decision to flee. Although he pleaded with his family members to run, they all refused to. David ultimately fled to Split in Croatia, where it was believed to be better for Jews, as it was then occupied by the Italians. There was a Jewish community with a synagogue, and David got work in a cement factory. Convinced that conditions would be better here, David registered as a Jew. However, before long, he along with 300 other Jews, were arrested and placed on a ship headed towards Trieste, Italy. Once in Italy, these Jews were placed in boarding houses where their comings and goings were tracked. Depicted here is a photo of David in Italy. Although Jews were not allowed to work, David ultimately got work in the fields through an Italian farmer named Marco Dal Toso, who he met through a friend. This chance encounter ended up saving his life. In December 1943, Germany seized control of northern Italy. Marco invited David to go into hiding in a hole they dug in his backyard. The hole measured approximately 4 feet by 4 feet by 3 feet and was covered by planks and a doghouse. David could only emerge from the hole at night. David remained in hiding for close to 2 years and only emerged when the war ended. 2 of David's siblings survived the war, and 7 siblings and their parents were killed, most likely at a little-known concentration camp called Jasenovac in Croatia. Jasenovac was considered one of the most brutal of all the camps. My father never told us that he was in the Jewish Brigade or the Bricha, but his uniform in these pictures suggests that he was part of the Jewish Brigade, an arm of the British military. The brigade helped the Bricha to assist Jews to escape from Europe to Palestine, the US, or other safer locations. Ultimately, David made his way to the displaced persons camp in Naples, where he taught plumbing and met Clara Levy. Every time I look at the pictures, I start crying. Okay, I think that's it. These are a couple of pictures of my parents after they met in Italy. Okay, that's him. You want mine?
So I'm going to pick up the story many years later, after the displaced persons camp in 1950s. You saw Clara and David came to America, settled eventually in Passaic, New Jersey, had 3 children, of which Helene is one. David kept in touch with the family, the Del Torso family, that saved him for many years. After he was in the United States. And in fact, in the early 1970s, Helene and the whole family went to visit them in 1973. But David died in 2000, and the family connection broke down. Didn't keep up with the family in Italy. And then, as Helene said, when she got interested in writing the story, getting in contact with the family was a really important part of completing the story and making the connection. But the question was, how do you get in touch with them? It had been 25 years almost at that point, didn't have any address or anything for them. They lived in a small town, and so all Helene had was a picture from 1973 of her family and the descendants of the family who saved her, but no real means to get in touch, and it was suggested by a family member that she post it on the town's Facebook page. And so she did, and 12 hours later, the family got in touch through Facebook. So if you ever want an advertisement, as much as we have all the ills of Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, an advertisement for Facebook, that's it. To get in touch with people over thousands of miles and decades and make a connection. So we very quickly had a Zoom call with the family. They don't speak English well, we don't speak Italian almost at all, but yet we had a connection, we were able to communicate, and we decided to make a plan to go visit. As I say, it had been since 1973, since Helene had seen them, and we wanted to go rekindle the connection. The people who were David's contemporaries had died, but the people who were alive, there were two young children who were born in 1942, 1943, who were the children of the people who own the home. They are still alive, and one of them has children, and one of them has also a child. So the three generations there, the oldest generation were people who were just born around the time that David was in hiding. And as you'll see, one of the women lived in the same house that David was in. So first a little bit about, oh, we lost the connection somehow. Is there a way to, okay, wait, I think I know how to do that. Yeah. What do I need to do? Yeah, sorry. There you go. Okay. Okay, so first a little bit about the town where the Del Tosos lived, sorry, where David was hidden. It's a town called Sosano. Almost certainly you've never heard of it. It's a very small town, about 4,500 people, outside Venice. I remember before we got there, we were wondering how to travel. We were staying in Venice to Sosano. Sue Gregg and I looked at some maps and some public transportation, and it's basically not on any public transportation route. You can't get there from here. It would have taken something like 3 hours and a combination of trains and buses and things like that. So it's not a town that is on the main light of anything, but it's a small town, and when you pull up, the first thing, the main site, as you would expect in many Italian towns, is a church and a center square centered around that. So we were a little early for our planned visit, and there's a main street in the town with about a dozen stores. We went in to get some coffee, and the first thing we saw in the bakery shop was this picture, which, as you could see on the left, is Helene's parents' wedding picture, and the other is the
Marco and Giuditta Del Toso on the right. They were the people who hid him.
And if your Italian is a little rusty, what that poster is doing is saying that the Levy family is coming to town, and everybody should gather at the town square at 5 o'clock that evening for a meeting. So that was not what we were expecting. We were expecting a lunch and an emotional visit, but that's what and as we walked down the street of the town, in the grocery shop, in all the little different locations, this poster was in every shop in the town. So they had really tried hard to get the word out. This was obviously a big deal to the town.
In fact, Zachary, our younger son, was like, "Are they gonna throw a parade for us?"
So this is the initial meeting in the town square. This is our family, and then next to Helene is the granddaughter of the granddaughter of the two people here on the right. She still lives in the town, so she's the daughter of one of the people who were born around the time that David was in hiding. And this was our first sort of greeting, very emotional greeting. in the
She was
town.
the person I communicated with after the Zoom. She kind of took charge for communicating with me.
So after meeting them, a little bit later, we went to the home, one of them, the one on the one on the
The one on the
left.
left is Teresina, and she lives in the home where her parents lived, where my father was hidden.
It's a beautiful backyard, as you can see, with, I think I have, there's another picture at the table with them when we first were greeting. Okay, I'll get to that. So we have more pictures of this coming, but yes, it's in the backyard, and we'll see in a minute the spot where he was hidden. So before we got there, actually, they took us, even before the evening, they took us to a school. They said, there's a bunch of students in the junior high school who want to meet you. And so they had a whole assembly in the school, and we came and we presented to them about the story. They were very interested. They were learning English, and they're learning about their town's history. And so we talked to them about what had happened, about the difficult choice that the people of the town had made to do this in hiding, to hide someone when their life was at risk, and how momentous that decision was. These are just a couple pictures from the classroom. So this is more in the backyard, and you could see the beautiful backyard. And one of the things that, seeing this, David's house in New Jersey, in Passaic, New Jersey, was almost modeled on this. He too had a beautiful backyard with figs and other plants growing, grapevines, very much, I think it probably provided great comfort to him because of the experience here.
It was very, aside from being very emotional, it was very eerie to walk into the backyard. I just felt my father's presence in many different ways, because he had a very similar, you know, the grapevine, the fig trees.
So this is the four of us standing on the exact spot where David was hidden. There was, underneath there was the ditch that was built. As Helene said, it was very small. He stayed there all day. There was a doghouse that was put over it.
Yes.
So it would remain hidden. He couldn't obviously come out during the day because of fear of being discovered. There was at one point, I think, a local priest who came.
Yeah.
You want to?
This was a confusing story, but I think at one point the wife got very nervous, and she confessed in church that they were hiding a Jew, which was, I guess, a sin or crime. And this has always been a little strange, but my father described how the priest came to him and said, if you convert, if you emerge from this hole and convert, we'll make you a saint and we'll protect you. But, my father always said, I was born a Jew, I will die a Jew, and that was the end of that story. But that always had a big impact on my life.
And there was another man in the ditch for a while.
Yeah, there was another Jewish man in the ditch who just couldn't handle being in that spot, who escaped and was killed.
So this is the house that still stands that the fields were behind, and as I say, one of the daughters lives there now, and this is on the right. Those of you who know Max and Zachary, they're there. The two on the right, depending on the far left, is the next generations.
The great-grandson.
The great-grandson of the original family. The whole group still live in the town. His father owns a grocer in town, and that's the siblings on either side of Helene the grandson and granddaughter.
It was Marco, and then he had Luisa and Teresina, and Luisa had those two, Emanuela and Marco.
And then at night, we had this gathering of the town where people came, and this is just a couple pictures of us speaking to the town, to the group there in the evening, and we stayed another hour for people from the town were justifiably proud of their connection, of their history, wanting to know more, wanting to know what happened to David, wanting to know his life in America, interested in also talking about the town's history and how some people had connections to others who would also had harrowing stories. But just it was so inspiring to hear the people in the town. Remember, this is 80 years ago. No one in that building was alive when this happened. And I don't know what the word had been passed down from their parents or grandparents. And it's not a Jewish community in the town, and there's no Jewish community anywhere around there. So it's not because of that they're connected, but they feel so connected to this act of justice and courage that their town had a part in, that they all wanted to come and be a part of it and meet and talk about it. And then later we gathered, the town mayor came to see us, some other senior official in the town. This was a big deal for the town. And so that was so wonderful for us to feel that even after 80 years, even after a town you never heard of, not with a local Jewish community that continued to preach and talk about this, that this still remains such a central fact of the town's identity. And especially on this holiday, on Yom Kippur, where we think about people who've died, and of course we'll have our Yizkor ceremony later. We think about the choices people make and the choices we make and the courage this town showed, and we want to have hope. And the visit combined all of those. And so we're very proud to be able to come share it with all of you and give you a sense of it, and it still remains incredibly meaningful to all of us in our family. So thank you. We'll be happy if there's time to take questions.
So we're going to go around and take questions, and for people of a certain age, I always say I had to play Phil Donahue now, as we share some questions.
I was just wondering, based on what you said, did the townspeople, were they aware that, other than the priest, I guess, that the family had dug the hole, and had the hole been dug for any particular reason?
It seemed like other people knew about it. It seemed like it wasn't just the family. There were others who knew, but we don't have anything specific about it.
I think Jim's wife had a question. Okay.
You talked about your father being part of the Jewish brigades and the uniform. Was this while he was hiding in the hole, or this was after?
This was after the war ended.
Okay.
So, which is something I learned from working on the book, is it was illegal for Jews to just travel, immigrate. There were a lot of laws limiting where Jews could still travel, and it was like an underground organization that was helping Jews escape to these camps and get out of Europe. So that was all after the war. But he never, ever told us that, ever. And I have the feeling it was because maybe there was some illegality involved, and he was like, he was a nervous man after the war. I mean, he was very worried about, doing things right, not, Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Did your father ever say why they decided to save him?
No, and when we met the family, I was asking them the same question. Did their grandfather or their father ever say anything about why? And they said they never spoke about it.
He had been doing some work with them, right, in the fields.
Yeah,
and he got to know,
it seemed like they were friendly. My father and Marco became friendly. They worked in the fields. Marco's wife would bring them lunch every day. They just became friends.
But obviously a big leap from friends to putting your life at risk with the hiding.
Are you expecting or hoping to maintain a connection with the family and with the town at all?
You know, that's a very good question. You know, after meeting them, I felt, you know, maybe I should send them gifts on holidays. It's hard. I don't really, I really don't know. What do you think?
I mean, in the wake of it, you have this tremendous emotional connection, and it gets harder to maintain over time when you don't have the same, and we don't speak the same language, unfortunately, and we lead very different lives. But certainly trying when we can, and you're going to send them, or you sent them copies of the book with a...
Yeah, I've sent them copies of the book. I sent them photos we took that day. I mean, I think a Christmas card would be nice.
I have a pretty loud voice.
We have the live stream.
Oh, okay, oh, okay. A couple of questions. This is so wonderful to hear. Jimmy and I just came back from Germany, where we met with the townspeople of Gunzenhausen, which is the place where Jimmy's father was born and survived a Nazi attack, and the grandfather was killed. But so this is especially meaningful for us today. I'm just wondering, I don't remember the history. Was Mussolini already dead in the early 40s?
So apparently, things for the Jews in Italy were not terrible until, I mean, they weren't great, but they weren't terrible. But in 1943, the Allies defeated Italy, and the armistice was signed. And then the Germans used, and it was a very weak sort of government in Italy after that. And the Germans used that as an excuse to really assert their authority, particularly in the northern part of Italy. So that was when, before 1943, the war was going on, he was able to live more or less openly in the town. After 1943, when the Allies had defeated Italy, you would think things would be better, but it was actually far worse for Jews. So that's when he had to go into hiding, from 1943, shortly after the armistice, till the war ended in 45.
Did your father speak Italian?
Yes, he did. And he had quite a few Italian friends. I think he had a lot of affection for, and my mother spoke Italian as well.
Right. And I love these pictures. I'm just wondering how they survived, these beautiful pictures.
Well, that's a big question. You know, I wish I had done the book while they were alive and I could have still asked them questions. But most of the pictures were from my father's side, I think, because he had a sister who survived the war in Banja Luka, Bosnia, so she probably held on to all of those pictures from before the war.
I was just interested if you could speak more about like your father's life before it happened, like in the former Yugoslavia, and also, like I guess you were mentioning how your mother like didn't want to go back to Poland, but she spoke Polish, so about the different cultures that they came from, and you had also mentioned like your father's Sephardic background. If you could speak about that a little bit.
Well, that's an interesting, complicated question. I'll try to answer it. I mean, my mother had no affection for the country of Poland, the language of Poland, Polish. There was just absolutely no nostalgia. I mean, I think there was a lot of anti-Semitism there before the war. So, I mean, she just would say how she would never, ever step foot in the country. And I kind of feel the same way. Like, I don't think I could go to Poland for some reason. But my father, you know, I think before the war, you know, he always talked about there were Christians, Jews, and Muslims in the town he grew up in. And they all got along fairly well. His father owned a business with a partner who was Muslim. So he just had a lot more affection for his culture. He was 10 years older. I don't know if that mattered. But does that answer your question?
Live stream.
Okay. Helene, did your father ever speak about how he maintained his sense of Judaism, you know, given the fact of what he and your mom went through?
No, it was never discussed, and it is, you know, miraculous that both my parents, you know, had faith and believed in Judaism. But they didn't talk about it. That's a whole. They were fairly observant. They were, I would say, traditional / Orthodox. Like they had 2 sets of dishes. We observed. They were leaning towards Orthodox, and then they sent me to Hebrew day school, and I became Orthodox, and I sort of forced them to become more Orthodox. So that was like, but they stuck with it, even when I moved on from being Orthodox. And it was very good for them. I mean, you know, they had a nice community in Passaic, and they would, I would say, more Orthodox than anything else.
I'm wondering, how did your sons react to them? Granted, they're, you know, they may not be so effusive in sharing things, but how did they react to the visit?
Why don't you answer that?
Well, the best way to show that they had a connection was our older son, who's 31, doesn't travel with us anymore. Many of you may have had the experience. We have the transition from children traveling with you, and then they get the idea that this isn't really for them. But when he was participated in one of the calls with us, and when he saw the connection, when he felt the connection, he said, "This is a trip I want to go on." And so it was really a joy for us to have him with us, to come. As I say, we were in Venice doing sightseeing before that, and here. And so I think he felt very connected. He certainly wanted to be a part of the whole visit. He sat at the, you see, at the front of the school as we were talking to the classroom and getting a sense of that. He was at the front when we were, I don't know if I have a picture of that, when we were talking to the town. He felt a connection, and he was very proud of his family history there in that moment, and really wanted to be a part of it. Our younger son, I think, was sort of overwhelmed a bit by it. It's a lot to go and to hear and to sort of see all of that. And so I think he liked sort of understanding the history and seeing the place where his grandfather survived, but it also felt, I think, a bit overwhelming for him.
I just want to add to that. What happened was, on that initial Zoom call we had with Emanuela, the granddaughter, and others, and Max, our older son, Emanuela was like, "You have to come to Italy, we'll have pizza and pasta and vino." And then Max was like, "I want to do this. That sounds cool." And it was the first time he expressed interest in anything remotely Jewish and traveling with us again. So I just made it my business that we were going on that trip after he said, and they seemed to have a good time. I mean, you know, they didn't really talk about any of the emotions. Neither one of them really knew my father, because he was already a lot older by the time, you know.
Just judging by the pictures, it seems that the town is very proud of itself with what happened there, and I think that's a wonderful thing, because I know the sign had said "a story of courage and friendship" in Italian, and that's, I think that's a marvelous example that they set.
I think we were pretty shocked and overwhelmed at the whole day was joyful and happy and exciting and loving. From the minute we got there, it just was all positive.
And when we went to the school, they treated us like guests of honor. Not only did we speak in the classroom, they wanted us to see the entire school, took us on a tour, met the principal, met the teachers, saw the different shops and other parts of the school that they had and they were proud of. They felt like we were the visiting dignitary. We wanted to honor them and the town and all they did, and they were treating us like the dignitaries. So it really felt wonderful.
Do you know why your parents moved to Passaic? I mean, is that a Polish community, perhaps?
There were Jewish survivors in the town. There were other Jewish survivors. They had no family in the United States. I guess they had different options. I think one of the options could have been Brooklyn, which would have been better, but they just knew of other survivors.
Did your father ever talk about how he was able to keep his sanity by being in this cubicle?
He talked about how he read a bit by candlelight, and I think he was reading dictionaries of other languages. But you know, my father's English was not great. My mother's English was very, very good, but it was really hard to talk to my father about anything like that, anything all that sophisticated, because his English, I mean, he was already like 50 when he came here, or 40 or something, but it just wasn't great.
Okay. Well, please join me in giving a wonderful thank you to Helene and Seth. We have a little bit of a break, so schmooze among yourselves. At 2 o'clock, we'll have a study session downstairs in the classrooms led by our rabbinic intern, Jules Ilian. That'll take you from 2 to 3. And then at 3:15, we're back in here in the sanctuary for the run of afternoon into Ne'ilah. Please know, children's services are starting here in 2, so as it gets closer to that, please don't be in here so we can get the kids in here. So thank you all. Shana Tova. That was fantastic. I was watching it on the live stream. Oh, yeah? They did a great job of going back and forth in the slide. So I'll send you the link for that.
Okay.
A record of
Seth probably wasn't bad. It was fantastic. Oh, thanks. Yeah, it was great. It went better than I thought.
Incredible. The live stream did a very good job. The live stream did a good job of putting the slides up as we talked about them. No, the guys who run the projectors that we never meet. So, yeah, they're running those. Well, I told him in advance, but he would go whenever you would talk, and then he would go to slide. So I'll send you the link. No, it's all done remotely. Those cameras are controlled remotely. But nonetheless, I'll send you the link so that you'll have a video recording of the presentation, so you'll have that. And with the language. Very different lives. But that was really good. I'm so glad you brought it up to me at the beginning. Exactly perfect. Really? The crowd of good questions. This one was very tinny.
Yeah, I've changed the EQ a bit. Towards the end, it's starting to sound a little better.
Test.
because a lot of times, you know,
You're up there and you can't.